My mother didn't lower her voice. She set her spoon down, looked straight at me, and said, "Your sister is coming with her 2 kids to live here. You need to leave. You parasite." The word hit the table harder than the dish she pushed away. I blinked once. "You're joking, right?" She actually laughed. "No, I'm serious." Henry didn't look up. The light above us flickered as if it understood something I didn't. My father's chair stayed empty. My place in that house vanished with it. I didn't argue. I didn't break. I just sat there, my hand cooling against the glass, already planning the silence that would come next. The first time I understood what place meant in my family, I was 9. Ivy spilled a pitcher of juice across the living room carpet, a bright stain blooming into the fibers, and before the liquid even stopped spreading, my mother's voice cut through the air. "Elena, get towels." Ivy stood behind her dry and clean fingers tucked behind her back. I cleaned until my arms ached. No one said thank you. That was the pattern my labor her innocence. It didn't bother me at first. Kids don't name their roles. They just live inside them. But the years sharpened the edges. Ivy grew into the girl who wandered, collected crises returned only when applause or comfort awaited her. I became the one who stayed quiet, steady, useful. The daughter who filled in the gaps so others never had to notice them. When my father got sick, the pattern hardened. I learned how to heat soup without waking him, how to fold laundry in the dim hallway so the machine didn't disturb his rest. Ivy called sometimes, promising visits that rarely became real. When he died, she arrived just long enough to cry into our mother's shoulder and leave again before the casserole dishes cooled. I stayed. Not out of duty, though that word followed me, but because silence had already shaped itself around my days. My mother drifted through the house like a loose thread, fragile in ways she wouldn't speak aloud, and I filled the spaces beside her. I drove her to appointments, handled bills, cooked meals, sorted medications. I told myself it was temporary, that grief needed scaffolding. Months turned into 3 years. In that time, the house grew smaller around us. The yellow kitchen light always hummed faintly, the one above the sink flickering most evenings. The wooden cabinet door never closed quite right since the hinge came loose. I fixed the mundane things without being asked the kind of maintenance no one sees until it stops happening. My mother noticed only when Ivy called. Those were the rare nights when the old phone rang in a burst and her voice brightened in a way it never did for me. She would close her bedroom door, and I would hear the soft rhythm of her laughter in the hallway. Afterward, she returned lighter, restless, almost moving items around the house, as if preparing for a visit she never confirmed. Once I found my childhood photo albums stacked in the garage, their pages slightly warped from the cold. She didn't remember putting them there. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. Families bend under grief. They reshape themselves unevenly. My job was to help steady the weight. What I remember most from those years isn't the exhaustion. It's the quiet moments, the 2 of us eating soup at the kitchen counter, with only half the lights on the ones we kept dim, because bright light made her headaches worse. She used to rest her hand on the table as if testing the room's temperature. Those evenings felt almost like peace. But patterns don't break by themselves. They simply deepen. When I came home early one afternoon and found her sorting through my dresser, folding my clothes into neat stacks as if preparing them for somewhere else, I didn't ask why. She didn't offer a reason. The room smelled faintly of detergent and cold air. She looked at the empty space she'd made in the drawer, not at me. That was the day I would later think I learned my place was never really mine. It happened on a Wednesday evening, the kind of quiet night when the house usually settled into its familiar hum. I'd just come home from work, my tote still over my shoulder, the cold air clinging to my sleeves. My mother was standing at the counter with 2 mugs, steam curling between us. For a moment, I thought she'd waited for me. Then she spoke. "Ivy called," she said almost offhand. "She's moving back. She and the kids need a stable place." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. I set my keys down. The metal clicked against the tile. "Okay," I said slowly, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Something about rearranging rooms, making space. Something reasonable. But she didn't look at me when she continued. "She'll take your room." The words landed neatly without emphasis, like a small administrative note she'd forgotten to mention earlier. I felt the familiar pull of silence settle in my chest. I'm still living here, I said. Not loud, just factual. My mother finally turned toward me. Her expression didn't shift. You're 33, Elena. It's time you started your own life. Ivy can't manage 2 kids alone. They need this house more than you do. There was no malice in her tone, just the easy certainty of someone stating a rule she assumed I already knew. But something inside me tilted as if part of the floor had quietly lowered. You're joking, right? I heard myself say. The words came out softer than I intended, almost a breath. She laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just dismissively. No, I'm serious. The mug in her hand clinked lightly against the counter, a sound too sharp for the quiet room. Henry walked in from the hallway, then glancing between us before nodding at her decision, as if it had been his all along. No one looked at my face. No one waited for my reaction. In that instant, the years folded into themselves, the phone calls behind closed doors, the shifting of my belongings, the brochures left out on the table, the quiet sorting of drawers. None of it accidental, all of it pointing here. I stood still, my hand flat against the cool counter, breathing once to steady the weight in my ribs. I see, was all I said. And that was when the part of me that had spent a lifetime accommodating finally stopped moving. I didn't pack that night. I didn't slam doors or demand explanations. I did what I'd always done in this house, moved quietly, listened to the sounds between the sounds. The hum of the heater, the faint clicking from the hallway light. My mother rinsing her mug as if the conversation we'd just had left no trace. I sat at the kitchen table long after she went upstairs. The chair across from me, the one my father used to take, felt impossibly empty. That emptiness steadied me. It reminded me what silence can do when it is finally chosen, not imposed. By morning, I had a plan. I woke before sunrise, the sky still bruised blue over the neighborhood. My movements were steady, almost ceremonial. I brewed a small pot, not for comfort, but for clarity, and placed my tote on the table. Inside it, I began placing the items that mattered my identification, the payments I'd managed for the house over 3 years, the bills I'd covered, the records of repairs I'd paid for. Paper after paper, each one a ledger of invisibility. At 6:12 a.m., I opened the laptop in the dim light and logged into the shared account my mother and I used for household expenses. My fingers didn't tremble, but something inside me did something old, something tired. The numbers appeared slowly loading line by line until I saw the irregular withdrawal again. Money gone without a word. Not the amount itself, but the assumption behind it that what I earned was hers to rearrange. I exhaled once a long, level breath. Then I opened a new bank account at a different institution with a few clicks. The transfer of my remaining savings was quiet, almost gentle. A simple shift of digital decimals, but it felt like a door closing softly behind me. By 7 Hazura, the house had woken. I heard Henry's footsteps in the hallway, the too loud clearing of his throat he always did before entering a room. I didn't greet him. Instead, I stood at the counter sorting receipts into folders. He watched me for a moment, then walked past without asking what I was doing. That indifference helped more than he knew. It confirmed how invisible I'd become, and how easy leaving could be when no one was looking at me to begin with. Before leaving for work, I took a slow walk through the house. I wasn't nostalgic. I wasn't sad. I was gathering data, scanning the space the way I scanned spreadsheets. The loose cabinet hinge, the draft near the back door, the stack of mail on the console table addressed mostly to me. All the tiny tasks that had kept this place functioning quietly like a machine no one noticed running. I left them all where they were. At the office, I didn't speak about the night before. Instead, during lunch, I stepped outside into the crisp air and made a phone call to Adele. The attorney Mira had recommended months ago when she joked that I needed legal armor for the way my family operated. At the time, I'd laughed. Now her number felt like a lifeline. Adele's voice was even steady, careful with details. I told her the essentials. She asked sharp questions. I answered each one, hearing myself become more precise with every sentence. "You've contributed significantly to the household," she said. "Document everything, keep records accessible. And Elena, do not leave without formal notice unless it's by your choice and on your terms." "My choice," I repeated, letting the words settle somewhere deep. By the time I returned to my desk, the plan had shape. That evening, I began packing, not in boxes, but in exits. I moved slowly, methodically, the way one might fold away a winter coat. I started with the essential things, stored in plain sight, closed books, the folder of payments. I didn't disturb the room enough for anyone to notice. Every item placed into my tote or suitcase was chosen with intent, leaving no trace that I'd already begun leaving. Later that night, while my mother and Henry watched television in the living room, I walked past them, quietly, keys in hand. Working late, my mother asked without looking away from the screen. Yes, I said. It wasn't a lie. I was working on the part of my life she no longer got to edit. I drove to Mira's apartment, where she waited with her usual dry humor and 2 storage bins she insisted I borrow. You're not running, she told me. You're reclaiming. The words didn't comfort me, they clarified me. Over the next 3 days, I built a private architecture of departure. During lunch breaks, I toured small apartments across Seattle's quieter neighborhoods, each one a blank space free from inherited expectations. On Friday, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom with wide windows and a view of trees rather than people. The simplicity felt like oxygen. I scheduled a locksmith for Saturday morning. I told no one. Each night, the house continued on as if nothing had shifted. My mother chatted about Ivy's upcoming arrival, about paint colors, and where the children's beds would go. Henry made comments about how these transitions are healthy. I listened without responding, sipping water at the table, letting their plans drift around me like distant weather. They didn't notice the way I studied them, the way someone studies a place they're preparing to leave. I observed the rhythms of their conversations, the pauses, the small power plays, my mother insisting on a certain brand of cereal, Henry adjusting the thermostat without asking. These small dominances had once irritated me. Now they educated me. They showed me exactly how much of my life had been lived in someone else's frame. On Friday night, the house was unusually still. My mother had gone to bed early. Henry watched TV with the volume low. I stood at the foot of the stairs for a long minute, one hand on the rail. This had been my home for years. It had held my exhaustion, my caretaking, my quiet hopes that effort led to belonging. But belonging had never been part of the agreement. Only usefulness. I went upstairs, packed the last tote, zipped it calmly, then placed it beside the door. No theatrics, no declarations, just completion. At dawn the next morning, the sky still pale. My mother left to pick up Ivy and the kids from the airport. I watched her car pull out of the driveway from my bedroom window, the brake lights blinking once before disappearing. When the street fell silent again, I exhaled. The house was finally mine to leave properly, and the first step of that departure was simple. I opened the front door, let the cold air fill the hallway, and waited for the locksmith to arrive. Tony the locksmith arrived exactly on time. The cold morning light caught the metal tools on his belt, each one glinting like a quiet decision. He didn't ask many questions, just confirmed the doors to be changed, nodded once, and set to work. The old locks came off with a dull scrape, a sound that felt like lifting wallpaper from a house you no longer live in. By the time he finished, the sun had pushed itself over the street, warming the driveway in thin stripes. He handed me the new keys. The weight of them was clean, decisive. All secure now, he said. Good, I replied, and it was. Jonah arrived minutes later with his pickup. We loaded the last pieces of my life, my father's bookshelf, 2 suitcases, the tote, with the documents into the truck bed. No rush, no panic, just movement steady and final. When we were done, I stood for a moment in the doorway, looking at the house the way one studies a stranger across a room. Familiar outlines, no warmth. We drove to my new apartment. The walls were blank, the air still, the windows catching soft winter light. We set the furniture down. Mira arrived with groceries and a lamp. For the first time in years, my space felt like a space meant for me. That peace lasted exactly 9 minutes. My phone lit up on the counter. First vibration, then another, then an entire burst. Mom calling, Mom calling, Mom calling. Then a text, "Why aren't you opening the door? The key isn't working. What did you do?" Another call, then a third. I didn't answer. The apartment's quiet absorbed the noise like it was protecting me. When I finally drove back to the house, I parked across the street. Their suitcases were piled on the porch. Ivy was pacing her kids, sitting on the steps, shivering. Henry kept trying the handle, jiggling it harder every time. My mother's voice rose in short, frantic bursts. Panic had pulled all elegance from her posture. When she saw me, walking up, the relief in her eyes lasted only a second before anger overtook it. "Elena, open this door. Now." I stopped at the bottom of the steps. "It's no longer my responsibility." "What does that mean?" Ivy snapped, crossing her arms as if the scene on the porch were somehow my fault. I held up the folder: payments, bills, contributions, every record of the years I'd kept the house running while they were absent. "This outlines everything I've managed and everything I'm owed. You'll find a written notice inside. I'm no longer living here, and I'm no longer maintaining anything. You can't just change the locks," Henry barked. "I can," I said simply. And I did. My mother's face crumpled, not with grief, but with the realization that the ground beneath her certainty had shifted. She looked at the kids, then at Ivy, then back at me, as if trying to locate the version of me who used to apologize before she even knew what she'd done wrong. She always does what I tell her, she whispered to herself, not to me. She always, not anymore. I placed the folder on the porch railing and stepped back. Their voices rose behind me, overlapping, demanding clarity, demanding control. But the locks were already changed, the decision already made. And the silence that followed me to my car was the first silence in years that belonged entirely to me. The first morning in my new apartment felt unreal, as if the air itself had been rewritten. Light spread across the hardwood floor in long, uninterrupted stripes. No footsteps overhead, no cabinet doors slamming, no voice calling my name from the bottom of the stairs. Just stillness, clean, whole mine. I made coffee without rushing. The mug warmed my hands, and the quiet settled around me like a room finally exhaling. My father's bookshelf stood near the window, the grain of the wood catching a pale shimmer. For years it had been wedged between storage bins and forgotten coats at the old house. Here it looked like it had been waiting. I walked toward it, letting my fingers rest on the edge. The grooves were familiar, holding the shape of a life that once felt steady. In the kitchen, the kettle clicked as it cooled. Outside, the city moved at a distance, soft, muted, respectful. The documents I'd handed over yesterday were now filed neatly in a drawer. The new keys hung on a hook by the door. Each item appeared small on its own, but together they formed a quiet truth. The chaos I'd been carrying wasn't mine to carry anymore. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next request, the next criticism, the next shift in someone else's mood. My body recognized the difference before my mind did. My shoulders lowered, my breath deepened. The knot beneath my ribs loosened, then dissolved. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the cold morning air move across my face. Cars hummed far below. A single plant on the railing leaned toward the light. Nothing dramatic had happened. No grand apology, no dramatic confrontation, no sudden reunion. Just space. And in that space, a life that finally had room to begin. Some doors close with a slam, others with a turn of a key. But the ones that matter most are the doors you learn to close quietly on expectations, on patterns, on the version of yourself that stayed too long in rooms that never made space for you. Walking away wasn't punishment. It was clarity. A boundary drawn not in anger, but in steadiness. And in the stillness that followed, I finally heard something I'd missed. For years, my own life unfolding without permission. If this story stayed with you, stay close. There are more voices, more truths, more cold, quiet reckonings to tell.